It's 7 a.m. the morning after Maya and Ethan's destructive loop. Maya is staring at her coffee, feeling like a small, confused child who doesn't understand why people leave.
Ethan is driving to work in complete silence, feeling like that 8-year-old boy who learned that his needs make people explode. Underneath all of their protective parts, the managers, the protectors acting in extreme ways, the shutdown strategies, are the wounded inner children who started this whole protective system in the first place.
It's time to meet the exiles, the vulnerable parts of us that hold our deepest pain and, surprisingly, our greatest capacity for joy and connection.
Hi, we're Joel and Tehrina Terry. We're licensed therapists here to help you heal from anxious attachment, stop chasing unavailable love, and build the secure relationships and community you deserve. And today we're talking about exile parts, the wounded inner children that all of our protective strategies have been trying to keep safe. Let's check in with Maya and Ethan the morning after their destructive loop.
Maya woke up feeling terrible, not just about what happened, but about herself. There's a voice inside her saying, "You did it again. You pushed too hard. You were too much. No wonder he wants to get away from you." This voice isn't coming from her adult self. It's coming from a young part of Maya that's been carrying shame and confusion about relationships for decades. This is one of Maya's exile parts, the vulnerable, wounded aspects of her that her protectors work so hard to shield.
Ethan is driving to work, but his mind keeps replaying Maya's text from last night. There's a part of him that feels terrible about shutting down, but there's also a scared voice saying, "See, this is what happens when people need too much from you. It always gets chaotic. You should have kept more distance." This scared voice is coming from Ethan's own exile, a young part that learned very early that emotional needs lead to dangerous explosions and that the safest place is invisible and self-sufficient.
In internal family systems, we call these wounded inner parts exiles because that's exactly what we've done with them. We've banished them to the far corners of our psyche because their pain feels too overwhelming to face. These are the parts of us that experience the original attachment wounds that created all of our protective strategies. Maya and Ethan's protectors aren't just random protective patterns. They're sophisticated bodyguards whose entire job is to make sure these vulnerable exile parts never get hurt again. So every time Maya's scanner part monitors Ethan's text tone, it's trying to protect the part of her that remembers what it felt like to be suddenly excluded and confused about why.
Every time Ethan's shutdown manager withdraws during emotional intensity, it's trying to protect the part of him that remembers feeling overwhelmed and responsible for his mother's emotional chaos.
Let's meet some of Maya's exile parts. There's the 7-year-old Maya who remembers when her dad started working longer hours during her parents' troubled marriage. This little girl would wait by the window for him to come home, and when he did, he seemed distant and preoccupied. She couldn't understand what she'd done wrong or why Daddy didn't want to play with her anymore. This 7-year-old exile learned, when people you love start pulling away, it means you did something wrong. And if you can just figure out what it was, you can fix it and get love back. She's been carrying that belief for 25 years. There's also 12-year-old Maya, who remembers when her best friend Sarah suddenly started excluding her from group activities. Maya would see the other girls laughing together at lunch while she sat alone, trying to figure out what had changed. She spent weeks analyzing every interaction, wondering what she'd said or done to make Sarah stop liking her. This 12-year-old exile learned, love can disappear without warning. And when it does, you have to fight to understand why so that you can prevent it from happening again. She's the part that drives Maya's analyzer manager to replay every conversation with Ethan, looking for clues about what might go wrong. Then there's teenager Maya, who learned to walk on eggshells around her mother during conflict. When Maya would try to express her feelings or needs, her mother would sometimes give her the silent treatment for days. Maya learned that her emotions could make love disappear, so she started hiding authentic feelings and trying to be the version of herself that was the easiest to love. This teenage exile carries the belief if I'm too much, too emotional, too needy, too complicated, people will stop loving me. She's the part that Maya's perfectionist manager is always trying to protect.
Now let's meet Ethan's exiles. There's 8-year-old Ethan, who remembers asking his mom for help with homework on a day when she was struggling. Instead of getting help, his simple request triggered a massive emotional explosion. I can't handle one more thing. Why does everyone always need something from me? Can't you see how hard I'm trying? This 8-year-old exile learned, my needs are dangerous. When I need something from someone I love, it hurts them and makes everything chaotic. He's been carrying the belief that love means requiring as little as possible from the people you care about. There's also the 10-year-old Ethan who learned to scan his mother's face every morning to see what kind of day it would be. If she seemed overwhelmed or irritated, he would make himself invisible, playing quietly in his room, not asking for anything, sometimes even skipping meals if it seemed like preparing food would be too much for her. This 10-year-old exile learned love means taking care of other people's emotions and making sure you don't add to their burden. He's the part that Ethan's independence manager protects by making sure Ethan never seemed needy or overwhelming. Then there's teenage Ethan, who learned that sharing his feelings often made things worse. When he tried to tell his mom he was sad about his parents' divorce, she broke down crying and said, I can't handle your sadness on top of my own. So he learned to process his emotions privately and only show up when he could be positive and supportive. This teenage exile carries the belief that my feelings are too much for the people I love. If I want to keep them, I need to handle my emotions alone. He's the part that all of Ethan's protective strategies work to keep hidden.
Here's what's so painful about exile parts. They're frozen in time at the age when they were wounded. Maya's 7-year-old exile is still waiting by the window, wondering why daddy doesn't want to play anymore. Her 12-year-old exile is still sitting alone at lunch, trying to figure out why Sarah stopped liking her. Her teenage exile is still tiptoeing around, trying to be the perfect version of herself that won't trigger abandonment.
Some exile parts might be even younger, pre-verbal parts that hold feelings and sensations from infancy or toddlerhood that don't have words yet. Other exiles might represent entire developmental periods where a child felt unsafe or unloved, rather than specific moments. Ethan's 8-year-old exile is still in that moment of realizing his needs make people explode. His 10-year-old exile is still scanning faces for signs of overwhelm. And his teenage exile is still believing that his emotions are too much for the people he loves.
These exile parts often speak to us through what feels like anxiety or intuition, but it can be hard to tell the difference between an old wound being triggered and an actual present moment wisdom. If that's your struggle too, we created a guide called Anxiety versus Intuition that helps you distinguish between exile fears and authentic inner knowing.
You can download it for free. The link is in the description.
When Maya didn't hear from Ethan for 24 hours, it wasn't just Maya the adult who was concerned. Her 7-year-old exile felt that familiar panic of, someone I love is pulling away and I don't know why. Her 12-year-old exile started analyzing every interaction. What did I do wrong? How can I fix this? Her teenage exile started preparing to be the perfect girlfriend who wouldn't be too much trouble.
When Ethan read Maya's emotional texts, it wasn't just Ethan the adult who felt overwhelmed. His 8-year-old exile heard his mother's voice saying, I can't handle one more demand. His 10-year-old exile felt responsible for managing Maya's emotions and for making her feel better. His teenage exile believed that his need for space was hurting someone he cared about.
And this is why their destructive loop felt so intense and overwhelming. It wasn't just two adults having a relationship conflict. It was wounded children inside both of them, getting triggered and believing they were back in those original painful moments.
This is one of the most isolating parts of having attachment wounds, feeling like you're overreacting to situations that other people seem to handle easily. But you're not alone. If you've ever felt the childhood pain get triggered in your adult relationships, let others know by giving this video a like. It lets those carrying similar wounds know that they're not alone in their healing journey.
Here's what's remarkable about exile parts. They don't just hold our pain. They also hold our greatest capacity for joy creativity, spontaneity, and authentic connection. Maya's 7-year-old Exile remembers not just her dad's withdrawal, but also the pure delight she felt when he was present and engaged. Her 12-year-old Exile remembers not just exclusion, but also the deep friendship she had with Sarah before things went wrong.
Ethan's 8-year-old Exile remembers not just his mother's emotional explosions, but also the times she was calm and loving and they had wonderful conversations. His 10-year-old Exile remembers not just scanning for danger, but also the deep empathy he developed for other people's emotional experiences. When Exile parts feel safe, they bring aliveness, wonder, playfulness, and the capacity for deep intimacy to our relationships. But when they're scared and hidden away, we lose access to these beautiful qualities.
Maya's protectors have been working tirelessly for decades to make sure her exiles never experience that kind of confusion and abandonment again. When Maya's scanner part monitors Ethan's responses, it's saying to her 7-year-old exile, "Don't worry, honey, I'm watching. If he starts to pull away, I'll catch it early so we can do something about it." When Maya's protector acted in extreme ways during the destructive loop, fighting desperately for connection, they were saying to her 12-year-old exile, "I won't let you sit alone wondering what went wrong. I'll make sure we get answers."
Ethan's protective parts have been equally devoted. When his shutdown manager withdraws during emotional intensity, it's saying to his 8-year-old exile, "Don't worry, I'll keep you safe from causing any explosions." When his protectors acted in extreme ways during the loop, withdrawing completely and counterattacking, they were saying to his 10-year-old exile, "I'll make sure you're never a burden to anyone again."
When you think about your own exile parts, what age do they feel like? Are they young children, teenagers, or maybe different ages holding different wounds? Understanding the age of your exiles can help you know how to care for them. Let us know in the comments what you discover.
Despite all their protectors' hard work, Maya and Ethan's exile parts are still longing for something their protective strategies can't provide: to be seen, understood, and loved exactly as they are, including their vulnerability and their wounds.
Maya's 7-year-old exile doesn't just want Ethan to text back quickly. She wants to feel that someone she loves won't suddenly become distant and unavailable without explanation. Her 12-year-old exile doesn't just want to understand relationship dynamics. She wants to feel chosen and valued by her friends. Her teenage exile doesn't just want to avoid conflict. She wants to be loved for who she really is, not just the easy, agreeable version of herself.
Ethan's 8-year-old exile doesn't just want to avoid overwhelming people. He wants to feel that his needs and feelings matter to someone who loves him. His 10-year-old exile doesn't just want to avoid being a burden. He wants to experience being cared for without having to earn it. His teenage exile doesn't just want to keep his emotions private. He wants to share his inner world with someone who can handle all of him.
Here's the beautiful possibility that exile parts don't know exist. They can be healed. The wounds they carry don't have to define them forever. The beliefs they formed in childhood don't have to run their adult relationships.
This healing process involves what we call unburdening, helping these exile parts release the toxic beliefs and painful emotions that they've been carrying that aren't truly theirs. Beliefs like, "I'm too much," "I'm not worthy," "love isn't safe." These burdens can be released when exiles feel truly safe and understood.
When Maya's 7-year-old exile can feel the presence of an adult Maya who understands that when daddy got distant, it wasn't about her, and who has the power to choose relationships with emotionally available people, that little girl can finally stop waiting by the window and release the burden that it was somehow her fault.
When Ethan's 8-year-old exile can feel the presence of an adult Ethan who understands that his mother's emotional overwhelm wasn't his fault and who can set healthy boundaries around his own emotional capacity, that little boy can finally stop believing his needs are dangerous and let go of that heavy responsibility.
You're probably wondering, how do we provide this healing presence to our wounded inner children? How do we help our exiles feel safe enough to share their stories and release their pain and the toxic beliefs they've been carrying? The answer lies in connecting these vulnerable parts with the wisest, most loving aspect of ourselves. what in internal family systems we call the capital S self. There's something inside of both Maya and Ethan that's capable of being exactly the caring, understanding adult that their exiles have always needed, and that can be present with them in a way that allows true unburdening and healing to happen. And that's what we're building toward in this series.
The wounded inner child parts we see in Maya and Ethan reflect what neuroscientist Dr. Bruce Perry calls traumatic memories stored in implicit memory networks. When children experience attachment disruptions, these experiences get encoded not just as memories, but as embodied states of fear, shame, and survival adaptation. Research by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk demonstrates that childhood attachment wounds create what he terms frozen trauma states, neural networks that remain activated as if the original threat is still present. This explains why Maya's exile parts react to Ethan's withdrawal as if she's still 7 years old and doesn't understand why her dad became distant. Dr. Richard Schwartz's foundational research on exile parts reveals that these wounded aspects of personality develop when children experience what are called attachment injuries, moments when their emotional needs trigger unpredictable or overwhelming responses from caregivers. The developing brain creates these exile parts as containers for the overwhelming emotions and beliefs that result from these experiences. Studies on what Dr. Daniel Siegel calls implicit memory show that these early attachment experiences get encoded below the threshold of conscious awareness, but continue to influence behavior, emotions, and relationship patterns throughout life. The exile parts carry these implicit memories and the beliefs formed during overwhelming moments. I'm too much. Love isn't safe. My needs hurt people. Particularly relevant to understanding exile healing, research by Dr. Mary Main on earned security demonstrates that adults can develop secure attachment patterns even after insecure childhoods when they process and integrate early attachment experiences. Brain imaging studies show that this integration process literally changes neural connectivity, allowing new experiences of safety and connection. And the most encouraging research comes from studies on neuroplasticity and what Dr. Rick Hansen calls experience-dependent neuroplasticity. When exile parts receive consistent experiences of safety, understanding, and care, even from the adult self, new neural pathways form that can override the old trauma-based networks. This scientific foundation supports IFS's approach of healing exile parts through self-compassion and internal reparenting.
So let's get to the heart of it. If you recognized yourself in Maya or Ethan's exile story, I want you to know something that might be hard to believe right now. That wounded child inside of you isn't broken beyond repair. Those painful experiences you carry aren't evidence that you're damaged goods. They're evidence of how much you've survived and how hard you've worked to keep loving despite being hurt. Maya's 7-year-old exile who learned that love can disappear without warning. She's not oversensitive or needy. She's a little girl who loved her daddy so much that his emotional distance felt like the world was ending. That capacity to love deeply is still there, underneath all of the protective scanning and analyzing. Maya's 12-year-old exile who couldn't understand why friendships suddenly became confusing and painful. She's not socially awkward or fundamentally unlovable. She's a girl who valued connection so much that losing it felt impossible to understand. That desire for authentic friendship is still there, underneath all the relationship anxiety. Ethan's 8-year-old self who learned that his needs could trigger emotional chaos. He's not too much or inherently burdensome. He's a little boy who loved his mother so much that he was willing to make himself invisible to keep her stable. That caring heart is still there, underneath all the independence and withdrawal. Ethan's teenage exile who learned to hide his emotions to protect the people he loved. He's not emotionally unavailable or incapable of intimacy. He's someone who felt so deeply that he was willing to carry his pain alone rather than burden others. That depth of feeling is still there, underneath all the emotional control. What I want these exile parts to know, and what I want you to know if you carry similar wounds, is that the original hurt wasn't your fault. 7-year-old Maya didn't make her father withdraw. 12-year-old Maya didn't do something wrong to lose her friendship. 8-year-old Ethan didn't cause his mother's emotional overwhelm, and teenage Ethan wasn't too much for his family to handle. Those experiences happened because the adults in their life were struggling with their own wounds and limitations, and their young systems did what young systems do. They tried to make sense of painful experiences and created beliefs and strategies to prevent them from happening again. But here's what those wounded parts don't know. You're not 7 or 12 or 15 anymore. You're an adult now with adult resources, adult choices, and adult capacity to handle the big emotions and relationship challenges that once felt overwhelming. There's something inside of you that can comfort your own inner child, can validate that little one's experience and help them understand what really happened, and that can provide the safety and love your exiles have always been seeking. And it exists inside of you right now. Your exile parts have been waiting so long for someone to truly see them, understand their pain, and help them feel safe. They've been carrying their hurt in silence, protected by layers of managers and firefighters who are exhausted from trying to make sure those wounds never get touched again. But healing is possible. Those exiles can learn that the dangerous situations they remember are in the past. They can discover that adult you has the power to choose relationships with people who can handle their emotions and their needs. They can experience being cherished for exactly who they are, including their sensitivity, their longing for connection, and their big feelings. When exile parts feel truly safe and loved, something magical happens. Maya's 7-year-old can play again instead of constantly watching for signs of abandonment. Her 12-year-old can enjoy friendships without analyzing every interaction. Her teenager can be authentic instead of performing to be accepted. Ethan's 8-year-old can express his needs without fear of causing chaos. His 10-year-old can receive care without feeling like a burden. His teenager can share his feelings without believing they're too much for people to handle. And this is what we're moving toward. Not getting rid of these tender parts of yourself, but welcoming them home to a place where they can finally feel safe, understood, and loved exactly as they are. And up next, we're meeting that something inside of Maya and Ethan and us that's capable of providing exactly what our exiles need, our true self. You'll discover the wise, loving leader that's been inside you all along, waiting to guide your parts with the compassion and strength they've always deserved.
In the meantime, if you haven't yet seen the previous episodes from this series, we'll link the playlist right here.
Subscribe and take care of your heart. And remember, you're not alone. We're all in this together.